Davis steps under center. Gibson and McClendon behind him. Davis with motion by Richard. Will give the ball to McClendon. He leaps. Oh, he doesn't get in. He fumbled the football. Carolina holds. The game is over. And Carolina has won the game.
Finley to throw. Over the middle, intercepted. Wolford again. Wolford the other way at the 30, the 40. Wolford to midfield. Miles Wolford with the pick. The Heels on the doorstep of an enormous victory.
Left side of the line. Hood standing to Williams' right. Williams going to throw. One-on-one. Davis has it. Touchdown. Carolina wins. Carolina is the Coastal Division champion. Bernard fields it at the 26. Heading to the far side. Gio at the 35. Gio is at the 50. No, he's not. Yes, he is. Gio is going to take it for a touchdown. Are you kidding me? Connor Barth for the possible win. Snap, spot, kick away, high enough, long enough. It's good! It's good! Carolina has won the game on a 42-yard field goal by freshman Connor Barth. Good gosh, dirty!
This is the Heel Tough Blog Podcast. Guys, and welcome to this edition of the Heel Tough Blog Podcast. It is the final edition of the 2020 season, which means it's time for the Heel Tough Blog Podcast Awards Show, where we will hand out our awards for the 2020 season. And it was definitely an exciting one, buddy. This was one that Carolina came in with some heavy expectations. But as most people said in the poll that we put out that we allowed the fans to vote on, this is seen as a successful year for Carolina football, something for a little while that we were questioning whether or not it would actually be.
Yeah, I thought for the longest time that 2015 year would always be the most fun year I ever had being a Tar Heel football fan. I think this year kind of exceeded that because you got to go to the Orange Bowl and play a New Year's Six bowl game. You were playing in marquee matchups. Really, like the last half of the year, every game for Carolina was a pretty big one. And that feeling was a good one. And that's something that I think we're starting to get used to again with Matt Brown coming back. It's completed his second year. That big-time football is here in Chapel Hill. It's going to be here until he decides to retire once again. But, it was a successful season because of the way they finished the season. And I made that known after the Wake Forest win that if they finished strong, you can say you made progress. You won 8 games more than last year. You made a New Year's Six bowl game for the first time since New Year's Six was around, and the first time you played in a major bowl game in 71 years. So if you don't think this was a success, you're wrong.
Well, and not to mention the fact that Carolina also was very competitive with Notre Dame, was in that game for most of the way, and really started to show some improvement on the defensive side of the ball while continuing what we knew they could do on the offensive side of the ball. So we're going to get into that. We're going to, of course, talk a little bit about everything that Carolina is going to lose. We'll talk about, just the team in general through a lot of the discussions that we're going to be having about the awards. But we're going to go ahead and dive right into it here off the bat. And, we're going to save, some of the more important awards for the end. So we'll start with some of the ones that are kind of on the back end, some of the ones that we had you guys vote on later on if you filled out our fan poll, which we are glad. We got 55 responses on that. Would have, of course, loved a little bit more interaction from the fans, but we really appreciate those who did interact. We thought that was a fun way to get you guys in on that. Next year, we'll probably go ahead and put those out right as the season ends, give you like a week or so to vote on it a little bit more. That was just something that kind of came to me out of the blue. I thought maybe I would be able to make something up and got something up quickly for you guys. But let's start with the 2020 Comeback Player of the Year award. Carolina had some guys that, of course, last year, especially in that secondary, got banged up, missed a good majority of time last year. So we, asked who you think your 2020 Comeback Player of the Year for the Tar Heels should be this year. We'll reveal the fan vote here in just a minute. We'll also have that graphic will be on the bottom of the screen for you guys to check that out as well. But we're going to give you ours. If we differ on them, then we will turn to the fans. And if they are the deciding vote, then we will hand it out to that person. If all three have different ones, then I don't know how we're going to do it. We'll have to figure that out, but I don't know if that's going to be too much of an issue. But so, for this category, the three that I put, and of course this was open to other people being able to jump in and put other names in, were Patrice Renee, of course, guy that, of course was, supposed to start the season for Carolina a year ago, was suspended in 2009 in the first game of 2019 due to the fight that happened to finish out the Larry Fedora tenure against NC State. Comes back in the second half of that game, played well in the first half of the game against Miami, Mac Brown's first game back at home, and then of course tears his ACL, misses the rest of the season, ends up coming back for his fifth year in Chapel Hill this past year and had some nice production, stepped up for Carolina in some really key moments, 28 total tackles on the season, really stepped up to have big games against NC State and Duke when Carolina needed him to play a big role after some injuries sort of set in with guys like Storm Duck and even Kyler McMichael. He stepped up and had a nice, a pretty productive season for him, which turns out to be his final in Chapel Hill. He's actually going to move on and transfer. The other guy that we had up there, Cameron Kelly from the secondary. Of course, you guys remember last year started his first career game against the Clemson Tigers. Looked pretty good in that game, was in there due to injury. Ends up tearing his ACL trying to tackle Trevor Lawrence. Yep. Ends up coming back this year, playing a decent role for a while for Carolina there, especially once we saw Jaquarius Conley go down with an injury. They moved Trey Morrison back into the nickel after he played there in the game against Boston College. And you had Cameron Kelly alongside of Don Chapman trying to hold things down in the back end of that secondary. And then Chris Collins was the other guy that we put on there. Wasn't out because of injury, just took a year, to sort of get familiar with the system, took a redshirt year. That's what Mac Brown and the staff said. But he came back, was relatively productive, especially towards the end of the season. Really hate that he had to miss the Orange Bowl game because you felt like that was maybe a chance for him to establish a little more momentum towards the end of the season. But those were the three guys that I could come up with, and I think those are probably the group that we're going to go with. So out of those three, who would be your comeback player of the year?
I went with Patrice Renee. I know his production on the field didn't maybe warrant that, but I think his leadership off the field is what really meant the most to this football team in that secondary. I don't know if Tony Grimes and Storm Duck and those guys look as good as they are without Patrice Renee in their ears, kind of being pretty much a player coach for them because he was a more a reserve role. So I know he's transferring. I know he's leaving the program, but he was a big part of the growth of that secondary, which really turned the way the defense performed in the second half of the season.
Yeah, this is a tough one. I mean, look, I think both Patrice Renee and Cameron Kelly had really good seasons. I mean, Cameron, had his struggles at times when it came to helping in the run game, but still was one of the top tacklers on this team with 55 on the season. And really, you could see towards the end of the year, once he was able to get back into his rotational role, he was really a little bit more comfortable there. It felt like, early in the season, he had kind of been forced into a role that might have been just a little bit too big for him early on, but I thought he adjusted really, really well. I'm going to go with Patrice Renee as well, though. I think Cameron Kelly, definitely had a productive year. I feel like he's a guy to keep an eye on for next year, but I think you're right. You look back at some of those games. I think that NC State game is the one you really look back at it. Patrice Renee does not play the way that he did in that game. That's probably a much closer game. There was a lot of injuries at that time. Carolina's secondary had gotten banged up, and this is a guy that has stuck through so many different things in his time being on campus to be able to fight back. Wasn't even 100% at the start of the season. We remember Mac Brown saying that in one of his first press conferences after the Syracuse game, that was the reason we didn't see a whole lot of him. To come back, play the role that he did, and be able to play it as well as he did, I think he deserves the Comeback Player of the Year award. But Cameron Kelly, as we mentioned, a fantastic season for him. How about your 2020 Freshman of the Year? I think this one, a lot of people were pretty boisterous on this one. The fans actually meant to mention this. Fans did go with Cameron Kelly for their Comeback Player of the Year. So the fans were pretty heavily on Tony Grimes for Freshman of the Year. 73% of the vote went to Tony Grimes in this one. But I had Jaquarius Conley and Kamen Rucker both up there as well. And I think despite what the fans are saying, I think there's a little bit more of a conversation here than they would lead you to believe.
I think if Tony Grimes would have been on the field for much more than what he was, I think he would have been a slam dunk Freshman of the Year for this football team because the secondary was different the second he stepped on the field. And it shows you why he was a five-star prospect, why he had the confidence to go ahead and reclassify because he was supposed to be a senior in high school this year. As Kirk Kuchar told us that many times during the Notre Dame game, how he was supposed to be a senior in high school playing at the college football level and making an impact. Same thing with Kamen Rucker. Had he been on the field more, because I think you look at what he did in limited production, you really excited what he's going to do moving forward next year for the defense. Mm-hmm. But I think you got to go to Jacarius Conley because he has such a larger role. And for the most part, did as well as you could ask a freshman could do in a COVID-19 season in the scheme as complex as Jay Bateman is, and he produced at a pretty good level for Carolina. The good news is that, all three guys on the defensive side of the football. So as we're looking at next year, we know that's where Carolina's got to take the next step. This is why you're more confident this defense next year will be more of a championship caliber defense, and Carolina can win some of the games they lost this year.
I mean, look, Josh Downs had a pretty solid year in the role that he had to play. But I mean, you only had 7 catches the entire season, 119 receiving yards. I just don't feel like he stacked up quite at the same level as these guys did. And there was an other section. Unfortunately, he didn't get any votes, but he'll be a guy that could be one of our breakout players for next year.
Right.
That will end up potentially handing the award to. First of all, I want to say this. Kamen Rucker, I think there's got to be a conversation here. I don't think enough people really gave him the respect that they needed to when they were voting on this. This was a guy that was ranked outside of the top 1,000 prospects in the country. And to come in as a true freshman, we've seen other guys that have done it later on in their careers, couple years into their career. This guy, as a true freshman, was probably your best defensive line freshman, which is saying a lot considering you have highly rated guys like Des Evans on the defensive line. You had Miles Murphy on the defensive line. Kedrick Bingley-Jones, of course, went down with an injury, but you had Clyde Pinder there as well. For him to come out and play as well as he did, as early as he did, cannot be discounted. And I think, just about any other year, he probably would have taken this award home.
Right.
Tony Grimes is, like you said, really interesting case because, towards the end of the year, he was probably one of Carolina's 2 or 3 best defensive players on the field. They did not – they tried to throw against them, and it didn't really work out. Many times came down with his first career interception in the game against Miami. Did not allow a catch in the Orange Bowl game against Texas A&M. So he definitely was really productive. But I'm going to go with you. I think, we thought when we handed the award out mid-season, we said to ourselves, okay, we're going with Jacarius Conley because, there just really hasn't been anybody else that has really stepped up and had a great season. Kamen Rucker was just kind of rounding into form. We had seen a little bit of him. He really came to life in the second half of the season. And Jacarius Conley was a guy that had a great start to the year, got injured, and then wasn't heard from until, after the midway point of the season. But when he came back, it allowed, Trey Morrison to move back to safety, which opened up a little bit more flexibility for your secondary. And he really, really played well. He settled into that role perfectly, was able to make, become a really solid tackler, made a couple of really nice plays in the open field, both against Miami and Texas A&M. Still a guy that probably has to work a little bit on his coverage ability, but I still think this is a guy that's definitely deserving of the Freshman of the Year award. I think he put just to get together just a little bit more complete of a season, but it's very, very close. So a razor-thin margin, I'll give it to Jacarius Conley as well. So now we'll move on to Coach of the Year. We got some really interesting nominations here. Again, there is another spot, so you guys can put in whoever you want there. Mac Brown was put on here a couple of times. We're not going to count those. Mac Brown, when we say Coach of the Year, Mac Brown is not an option.
Right.
This is his coaching staff. We know that. If just about any year you would pick the head coach. It's basically the assistant of the year. Maybe that's what we're going to do next year. That we'll end up changing the phrasing of it. But you look. I think there's a couple of really good candidates. The 3 that I listed first were Phil Longo, of course, the offensive coordinator, also the quarterbacks coach, had a really phenomenal year. This was a great offense for Carolina, probably the best that they will see for even some time. It's going to be hard to really produce 2 1,000-yard rushers, a 1,000-yard receiver, and have a quarterback that throws for over 3,500 yards and 30 touchdowns. But you look, some of the other guys that we put up there, Jay Bateman, we definitely rounded into form as the season went along, was a guy that, we had some question marks after. We talked a little bit about that on the last edition of the podcast that we did, there were some questions as to whether or not his defensive scheme was actually working, if he had the right guys in place. As he started to rotate in some of the younger guys, we saw that was he had those right guys in place, and that we were probably wrong to question him at all, and finished the season extremely strong. And then Robert Gillespie, the running backs coach for the Tar Heels, as we mentioned, 2 1,000-yard rushers in the backfield, helped with the progression of Javonte Williams, who, of course, is now the single-season record holder for scrimmage touchdowns, passing Don McCauley during this season. Michael Carter, also huge senior year for him, led the ACC in most rushing categories, and is still working on developing some of the younger backs that we saw in the backfield. We saw, I think that might have even been a bigger testament to how successful Robert Gillespie has been. Saw British Brooks start the game, the Orange Bowl game against Texas A&M, and actually had some decent success for a guy that was a former walk-on.
Yeah.
I think that those are 3 really good candidates. A couple other ones that were on there that people threw out there. Dre Bly got a couple of votes as well. I think 2 for Dre Bly. 3, I believe, for Dre Bly. And then 1 for Tommy Thigpen as well, the co-defensive coordinator, getting a shout-out. So who would you go with here?
Look, so you look at Phil Longo. I think the offense did what it was supposed to do. It took another step forward. The numbers are what they should have been. So I don't think. Was there better stuff in the offense? Was the Resin offense better this year from this first year? Absolutely. But that was the expectation. Defensively, had you not lost the games you lost at Florida State and Virginia, and your defense looked as bad in those games, then you had the Wake Forest debacle. Even though you still won the game, you still looked awful for the first 45 minutes or so of that game. So it's hard to pick those 2 guys. And you look at what Robert Gillespie did with Javonte Williams and Michael Carter. How can you not go with those guys? How can you not go with them for the job he did with those 2 dudes? That's one of the best duos college football has seen in the modern era. They were getting compared to Reggie Bush and Lindell White. That's
legitimate comparisons, too.
That's GOAT status. That was maybe, that's always regarded as the best running back tandem in modern era college football. You're doing this in a spread era where it's supposed to be, you're supposed to throw the ball around. You got Sam Howell and De'Ami Brown and Daz Newsome, but you got 2 All-American quality running backs in your backfield. And so I think you got to go with them, because without their production, I don't think Carolina has the season they had.
Yeah, look, I'm not going to say that this was totally expected for Phil Longo. These are record-setting numbers. This is
what they were supposed to do.
You expected 2 1,000-yard rushers, 1,000-yard receiver, and a quarterback to throw for over 3,500.
Matt Brown said he wanted Oklahoma-style offense. This is what they – so.
I don't even think Oklahoma in recent years has had 2 1,000-yard rushers to go along. I'm just saying this is he took it to another level. This was an extraordinary year.
Had he not screwed up on the 4th and 1 call in the Orange Bowl, maybe he would have gotten the Coach of the Year award. But he proved once again that he's still not as smart as he needs to be, and he could still be potentially holding this team back with some of his play calling. I'm not going to go that far.
Look, this team went 8-3. If he doesn't call the game that he calls against Miami, this team definitely is – they probably would have lost that game. I'm not going to say – this is not a guy that, as many Tar Heel fans want to make it seem, if he left, this offense would flow seamlessly without a problem. I don't think that there's just another guy that you can call in and all of a sudden this offense is going to be working. He deserves some credit. He deserves some credit. Well, I don't really know. We have to – what is Tom Herman at this point now? We thought, great offensive mind when he was there at Ohio State, but then you see what Ryan Day did when he came in there. It didn't really change. That offense may have even become better. Now Tom Herman back out there as a free agent. Haven't really seen a whole lot of people talking to him just yet. I'm not saying that I don't think he's better than Phil Longo. I really don't know how to judge that. It's been a while since we've seen Tom Herman call an extremely efficient offense. I think his offense at Texas was not very good. I think anybody with eyes can see that. You should have been running the ball a lot more with the talented group of backs that you saw as the season progressed, as opposed to trying to turn Sam Ehlinger into something that he wasn't, which is a Heisman-style quarterback. But look, I don't think it matters. I don't think Tom Herman would be a guy that Carolina would pursue anyways. Maybe they would, but I don't think we're going to have to worry about that. But I think Phil Longo definitely deserves a lot of credit. Jay Bateman, yeah, I'm with you on that one. I think, you look at the fact that he had some struggles middle of the season. There were still, some bumps in the road, some setbacks before this team really took a step forward and became a better defense towards the end of the year. So, yeah, I'm with you. I go with Robert Gillespie because, this was the guy that I was saying, when we were talking about this award even earlier in the season, I was saying this is probably going to be my guy unless something, this group comes off the tracks. Because like you mentioned, I mean, you're talking about Javonte Williams going from being a guy that barely even got a scholarship offer at Carolina to becoming one of the best running backs to ever play in the ACC if you just look at the 2020 season alone. Michael Carter, just a phenomenal year for him. Another guy that, again, came in, was productive his first few years on campus, but really took it to the next level and developed in his final 2 years under Robert Gillespie. And then, as I said, British Brooks, DJ Jones, even in the limited snaps that we saw him play. Same thing with Elijah Green. Every running back seemed to be able to take the ball and make something happen with it. And that you got to credit Robert Gillespie for what he's done, not only on the recruiting trail to get these guys here, but what he's done when it comes to developing these guys, because Carolina's always had pretty legitimate running back coaches, but we've never really seen these guys be able to take steps forward. They've always come in. Elijah Hood really was the same guy when he came in that he was when he left. We saw so much more growth from guys like Javonte Williams and Michael Carter to becoming the players that they were at the end. So, yeah, I go with Robert Gillespie, but a lot of guys that really had great seasons. I do think that I should have probably put him as one of the options without having to put other. I think Dre Bly deserves a lot of credit as well for what he was able to do with Tony Grimes, able to get Kyler McMichael into the starting lineup, and that was pretty much a seamless transition for Kyler. He had a really good year as well. Look at the fan vote. They went with Phil Longo over Jay Bateman. Robert Gillespie not getting as much love as we're giving him. So the award will go to Robert Gillespie, but the fans definitely high on what Phil Longo did this season. So how about we go to our breakout player of the year for the Tar Heels? One of the guys that's already received an award is on here, Jaquarius Conley. Really good year for him, as we mentioned, broke into the starting lineup early on in the season, actually started the first game of the season for Carolina, but went down with an injury. Once he returned, though, had a couple of rough games where he was still trying to get himself back on track, but really settled in to have a great year. Along with, I put Kyler McMichael on there. I mean, I thought he had a really good season on the outside. Another guy that had to battle through some injuries midway through the season, but I thought for the most part had a really, really good year. You got to remember, this was a guy that some people were questioning how he was able to beat out Patrice Rene, and we found out why he did that once we got into the season, as well as Tamari Fox. I listed him on there. Really good season for him. 46 total tackles, 6 tackles for loss, 4 sacks on the season. Definitely you could see got worn down a little bit on the interior as the year went along, struggled a little bit in run defense as he got later into the year, but still a guy that was really, really productive for Carolina on the defensive line. Fans threw out Tony Grimes in there as well, so we'll throw him into this conversation after his tremendous freshman season. But who do you have the breakout player of the year award?
Before I give the guy, another thing about this award, all defensive guys, this is important when you start getting ready for 2021 and we'll start breaking down what Carolina can potentially be as a football team. They got to be better defensively. You've got a lot of guys that will be back in this scheme next year. It does appear Jay Bateman, of course, will be back as of right now. And all these guys we're talking about are going to be playing a major role for this team. So a lot like with the defensive breakout player, we went Conley. You got to go Conley here because he has more to show than any other guy. I thought Tamari Fox started off the season fantastic. But as you mentioned, towards the middle of the year and the end of the year, he got worn down. Maybe it was just physically his body isn't ready for the amount of snaps he got. Maybe it's the talent level that he was seeing against whatever it was. Had he kept up that level of play from the first game to the Orange Bowl, I think there would have been a conversation for him. But his play significantly dropped off. And had Tony Grimes played more, I think maybe he'd have been an easy selection because he's going to be a trendy pick next year to be one of the best corners, not in the ACC, but in college football. But for this season, you got to go to Jaquarius Conley.
Yeah, I think there's a really good case here for Kyler McMichael as well. Not a lot of people giving him much respect there. But, I mean, you look at what he did. He started the most games at any corner for the Tar Heels this season. Really did a great job. I mean, if you look at the pass defense statistics, you would say to yourself, well, how would we have anybody from our secondary up here? A lot of that was centered in the middle of the field where Carolina gave up a lot of yards. Of course, gave up a lot of yards when Jeremiah Gemmel was in coverage. Our outside corners did a really good job for the majority of the year. I'm going to go with Tamari, though. I think you look at, he was a guy that started all year for Carolina. This was a guy that last year came in, started some games for the Tar Heels early in the year, became a rotational player, was never really able to gain a really big role. But this year, I think one of the things that you got to realize with Tamari was he was tasked with a lot early on. This was, both him and Raymond Boasic talking to Lee Pace yesterday, he said, look, the reason that we didn't see that much rotation was because we didn't know a lot about these freshmen. This was not a typical offseason ahead of the 2020 season for Carolina. You didn't get to know a lot of these guys. So you had to work them in slowly and find out whether or not they were ready to play. So Tamari Fox and Raymond Vohasek, they played some of the – if I remember looking correctly on Pro Football Focus, Tamari Fox in the top 5 of defensive snaps played among defensive linemen. So this is a guy that played a lot. Yeah. He had a lot on his plate. He fought for most of the season. Again, he stepped up. He had some games where he struggled, primarily against some of the better offensive lines that he faced. But I still think he did enough that I'm going to give him the Breakout Player of the Year award. So that means we'll turn to the fans, you the fans at home. And you gave it to Tamari Fox. 59.6% of you guys going with Tamari Fox, 30.8% for Jaquarius Conley. And then you come over to Kyler McMichael, just 5.8% of the vote. But definitely a great season for all three of those guys. Now we'll start getting into some of the bigger awards. Let's go to the Defensive Player of the Year for the Tar Heels. This one seems like it's probably relatively easy, I think, in a lot of people's minds. We got Chaz Surratt, first of all, the senior linebacker, of course, another phenomenal year for him, led the team in tackles once again, didn't hit the 100 tackle mark this season. But again, with a shortened schedule, that was something that was to be expected. And still a phenomenal year for him. You look, even with the amount of missed tackles that he had to finish above 90 tackles, still a really good year for him. Tamon Fox, the other guy that I think a lot of people were probably pretty high on with his season, finished with the team lead in sacks, 7 sacks, 10.5 tackles for loss. It's the second straight season with 10.5 tackles for loss or more and 7 sacks or more since Quentin Coples did it back in 2010, 2011. So it's been a while since Carolina has had a guy that has been able to put up a season like that. But again, another guy that, or another season for Tamon where you just feel like there wasn't enough consistency there. Came out and burst, but still had a nice productive season for him. And then Jeremiah Gemmel, I put him up there second on the team in tackles. Once again, leader in the middle for the Tar Heels. Struggled a little bit in coverage. I think that's probably the thing that might have hurt him the most when it came to the voting for this. But definitely a guy that still had a really productive season for Carolina as part of a really solid linebacker tandem that the Tar Heels have. You guys, two people did put Raymond Vohasek in there. Also completely butchered his name when they were putting it in there, but we're going to let that one go. But yeah, Raymond Vohasek, another guy that a lot of people are pretty high on for his season. So we'll also throw him in there. But who's your defensive player of the year for the Tar Heels in 2020?
It's Chaz Surratt, because I think it has to, because he was the best defensive player of the year. If we would have done this after the Boston College, I think Trey Morrison would have been the easy answer, because he was maybe the most impressive defensive player through the first 2 or 3 games of the season. His level of play didn't live up to that throughout the whole season, but 91 total tackles, 7.5 for loss, 6 sacks, interception, a fumble force, and a fumble recovery. When he was playing at a high level, this defense was different.
Right.
And now he had some issues, especially when Carolina had their struggles in October where they were losing games, where he was taking bad angles. He wasn't where he needed to be. But he got those cleaned up, and you saw the defense take a step in the right direction to finish out the season. So it's Chaz Surratt. Really excited to see what he'll do at the next level, because he's going to be a fun guy for defensive coordinators to learn how to use. As Jay Bateman learned how to use him in different ways this year, because you saw a lot more of him sometimes blitzing, sometimes dropping the coverage. He can do a lot, and Carolina's going to miss him a lot going into next season.
He still played out of position. I think he's probably a 3-4 outside linebacker at the next level because of his ability to get after the quarterback. That was what he did best. Led all of college football the last 2 seasons in quarterback pressures. So that's the thing that I think definitely gives him the advantage to this award. That's something that is, that's a statistic you don't see a whole lot of, but this guy is as good as anybody in college football, especially linebackers, at getting after the quarterback. That's what he did this year. Now, you mentioned some of the open field problems that he had. I think that's just part of his game. He's a very instinctual player, like you said, early in the season. So he's a guy that at times he's just, they say react, don't guess. That's not really how Chaz Surratt plays the game. He's a guy that, tries to be one step ahead of everybody. Sometimes it works out, sometimes it doesn't. But for the most part, it worked out at the college level. Very productive season yet again this year. And I just don't think we saw enough consistency from Tamon Fox and Jeremiah Gemmel. There were some holes in their game, like we mentioned with Gemmel and coverage. And then Tamon Fox, he was a guy that's, still having some trouble being able to contain the edge in the run game. He gets pushed back off the line of scrimmage sometimes. Still a very productive guy, a guy that we're going to be happy to have back next year as part of this defense to try to be able to replicate what was an amazing year, which we got to mention this stat, by the way, 36 sacks. That's 5th in all of college football for Carolina, something that we didn't think we would see anytime soon. We thought that would take a while to get some of those guys in there. And a lot of the guys that we're getting after the quarterback were the veteran guys. We're not even talking about the young guys being able to get to the quarterback this year. So definitely have to give some credit to the leader of that group, Tamon Fox, but we're going to go, I'm going to go with Chad Surratt as well. And you guys went with Chad Surratt at home with the fan vote. 37 votes, 71% of the vote for Chad Surratt. 15.4% of the vote goes to Tamon Fox. And then Jeremiah Gemmel with 9.6%. Let's move over to the Offensive Player of the Year. This one, I'm not going to lie, this kind of shocked me. There are 4 really good candidates for this award. I think all 4 of them, if they played separate from each other, probably would win this award just about any other year. You had De'Ami Brown, who came 1 yard short of 1,100 yards receiving, 8 touchdowns again this season. But again, just a deep threat that killed it for Carolina. 18.7 yards per catch this year. But that's the thing. When you look at those numbers, you would think, okay, this is a guy that's like what we saw from Matt Collins. That's pretty much his entire game. That's not what De'Ami Brown was. He also had some games where he stepped up, could play the role of a guy that just, ran an inside slant route to pick up a first down, did some things after the catch as well. Such a dynamic offensive player. So I think he definitely has to be recognized here. You got Sam Howell, of course, star quarterback for the Tar Heels, 3,586 yards passing this season, threw for over 30 touchdowns, got himself going on the ground as well. That was something that, was a big focus in the offseason, was him losing a little bit of weight, being able to get, move out in space, try to add that element, especially down in the red zone. That was something that we hammered at the end of last year, talked about early this year. If you could add that, it would make this team much more efficient. That's exactly what it did. Michael Carter, 1,245 yards on the ground this season, 9 touchdowns, easily the most productive season of his career in both of those categories. Led the ACC in rushing this season, which is no small task considering the just pure amount of talent the ACC had this year at the running back position. Also did it in the receiving game, over 200 yards receiving for him as well. And then Javonte Williams. How can you not have this guy on there? Just a tremendous season for him. 1,140 yards on the ground, 19 rushing touchdowns, which is the second most in program history behind Don McCauley, but did break Don McCauley's record for scrimmage touchdowns in the season as he got to 23 with his 4 receiving touchdowns on the year. Also had, I think, over 250 yards receiving as well. What an extremely productive year for all of these guys. But who do you give the edge to here and give the Offensive Player of the Year award to?
I think if you're breaking records that Don McCauley held in Chapel Hill for a long time, it's got to be that guy. So it's Javonte Williams, as you mentioned, 1,140 yards rushing, 7.3 rushing average, 19 touchdowns. He broke the scrimmage touchdown record because he got more involved in the passing. So we talked about in the offseason, he wanted to be more involved with it in this year. And he did so, 25 catches, 305 yards, 4-3 scores. He was Carolina's heartbeat in terms of when they got into the red zone. And really, whenever you needed a play, a lot of times you were giving the ball to 25 and he was making that play. It's really unfair to all these other guys because Sam Howell had a fantastic sophomore season. Yep. De'Ami Brown put back-to-back 1,000-yard seasons. Michael Carter led the ACC in rushing, and you mentioned that has Travis Etienne in the ACC. Kieran Williams from Notre Dame was in the ACC this year.
Khalil Herbert from Virginia Tech season.
A lot of guys, he outrushed them all, but he had 22 touchdowns. It's got to be the guy that broke records, and whenever he played at a really high level, Carolina felt unbeatable.
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty much what it is. 22 touchdowns was the mark. That's right, 3 receiving touchdowns for him. It's really tough because, we've got also the Player of the Year award here. So, you know what? I'm going to give it to Sam Howell here. I think you look at the production that he had this year. there were a lot of expectations coming into the year for him. This was a guy coming off a freshman season that was comparable to Trevor Lawrence and Jameis Winston. And there were expectations that he was going to take another step forward this year. Some people were questioning what exactly a step forward this year would look like. And again, you look at the statistics, not as gaudy as a year ago, but you also have to remember that he probably would have had one more game to play and potentially two if Carolina had played a normal schedule, because that would have also meant that they probably would have been in the ACC Coastal. More than likely, they would have won that game if everything goes the way that it actually did. Carolina would have been playing for the ACC championship game if the divisions were still in place. So he would have had potentially two more games to get up there. I mean, you look at the performances that he had at times this year. I mean, the 550-yard, 6-touchdown performance against Wake Forest almost single-handedly led Carolina to a victory in that one. His, actually played a really great game in the Orange Bowl after a really slow start, not having De'Ami Brown in that game. Really stepped up late, made a couple of really big throws for Carolina, and still a guy that is as efficient as any quarterback in the country when it comes to the fourth quarter. If there's a guy that you need to lead a fourth quarter drive for you, it feels like Sam Howell is probably the best person in the country to do that for you. So I'll give it to Sam Howell. We'll let the fans decide this one, and they go with Sam Howell as well. 54.7% of the vote for Sam Howell, which I'm actually a little shocked by. You got Javonte Williams at 35.8%. Michael Carter only received 3 votes, believe it or not, 5.7% of the vote, and De'Ami Brown with 3.8% of the vote. We'll hand out our final award here, and then we'll do some fun ones that we allowed you guys to vote on as well. Who is the player of the year for the Tar Heels in 2020? So this is the entire team. Take De'Ami Brown off of this one right here. That was an option if you wanted to put him in there as other. Replace him with Chaz Surratt, and it's pretty much the same 3 other guys that we just talked about. Really productive years for all of those guys. Who do you have as your player of the year for the Tar Heels here in 2020?
It's Javonte Williams. As I mentioned, I don't think Carolina has the season they had. I don't think they make the Orange Bowl without what he did on the football field for them both in the running game and the passing game. So a lot of great candidates. Sam Howell, as you mentioned, great year. Chaz Surratt, another great year. Michael Carter had a hell of a year. But Javonte Williams was this team's best player from the first game.
So I'm going to reveal the fan vote here first. Sam Howell, 64.2% of the vote here. 32.1% going to Javonte Williams, and then Chaz Surratt receiving 2 votes for 3.8%. First of all, how Michael Carter did not receive a single vote is beyond me. The other thing is that the answer here is Javonte Williams. I think that it's pretty clear. You look at everything that he did for this team. This Carolina team does not win some of the games that they won without the performance of Javonte Williams. Who knows if they win that game against Miami? Again, Michael Carter had a tremendous game himself, but you're also talking about a guy that was dominant against NC State, dominant against Duke, 4 touchdowns in that game. This guy is one of the nation's top running backs. The fact that he wasn't in the Doak Walker Award running is pathetic. The fact that Travis Etienne made it over him is a joke. All that is the fact that Travis Etienne had a more prestigious career. Travis Etienne played for a team that was in the college football playoff and had been in the college football playoff for the last couple of years, because if you look at the stats, they're not even close to comparable. 22 total touchdowns on the season, tied with Iowa State running back Breece Hall before he played in his bowl game. Just one behind Najee Harris before Najee played in the SEC championship game. And then, of course, the college football playoff semifinal game. This guy had about as good of a year as you could have hoped for. And the other thing is that nobody saw this coming. We thought that, okay, he can have another productive year. He was probably going to be able to, maybe reach that 8-10 touchdown mark. Nobody saw this guy rushing for 19 touchdowns this season, having 3 more in the receiving game, and being as dynamic of a threat for this Tar Heel team as he was. One of the leaders in the country in broken tackles, and runs about as hard as anybody in the country. This is the clear answer here. And I'm going to be honest with you. The only reason that he didn't win this award is because he didn't play the game. That's what most of the people are angry about, which is ridiculous. But you know what? He gets it anyways. Javonte Williams, your 2020 Player of the Year. So let's go through some of the other fun ones that we threw up there for you guys to be able to vote on. How about Play of the Year for Tar Heel football? I put up 4 of them. I think these were probably the 4 that most people would look back on. So you had the Javonte Williams run over Amari Carter of Miami. You have the Javonte Williams run over Tony Davis of Duke. Daz Newsome, amazing touchdown catch in the bowl game against A&M, which that's just where he seems to shine the most when he makes those highlight reel grabs. And then De'Ami Brown ripping the interception away from the Wake Forest defender for a long reception in that game. What would you go with as a play of the year?
The run against Miami will be in the hype video for the remainder of time of Carolina football because he trucked through that guy. And I think that's when you look back at the siege, look back at Javonte Williams' career at Carolina, that'll be the first thing you think of was him running through defenders at Miami while we were kicking their ass.
I'm going to be honest with you. I think if you go back and you watch it, I think the Duke one is better because he knocks Tony Davis from the 5-yard line all the way into the end zone. Now,
that poor guy he didn't mean to be there. He was wrong place, wrong time.
Yeah, he got knocked back to Durham when he tried to take on Javonte. That was just a very bad choice in a game that was a blowout at the time. Yeah. It really wasn't going to do much for you. And look, that play did not get much respect here. It only got 2 votes, 3.9% of the vote. That's my play of the year. I thought that was the best play of the year, and you did it against a rival.
Right.
That's what I would go with. But you guys at home, you guys thought Daz Newsome's catch in the Orange Bowl was the play of the year. Definitely a really great one. Again, that's one of the main things that I'm going to miss about Daz. You got to think, you could put together an entire highlight reel for Daz Newsome based on his bowl catches. He had 2 ridiculous grabs last year against Temple. And then this one this year, he's just, this is just what Daz Newsome does. How about best single game performance of the 2020 season? You got Sam Howell, of course, versus Wake Forest, 50 yards passing, 6 passing touchdowns in this game, tied an ACC record. You've got Michael Carter, 308 yards on the ground against Miami, an extremely productive day for him. And then De'Ami Brown versus Virginia, 200 receiving yards in this game. But, guys, how could you not get a win for De'Ami against Virginia? He had 2 unbelievable games, and Carolina lost both of them each of the last 2 years.
Yeah, you go with Sam's performance against Wake Forest because he pretty much put the team on his back and they willed them back to victory. And you don't know if Michael Carter has that performance against Miami had he not done what he did against Wake Forest in terms of Sam Howell. That's the best quarterback performance we've ever seen from a Tar Heel quarterback in our lifetime. So I would go with that performance.
I would say I would give Sam the edge there too as well, just because of how highly it ranked in ACC history. I think, you look at Michael Carter, again, just a phenomenal performance, biggest game of the year. That's why I think he has a really, really good argument here. But it wasn't a program record. Derek Fenner ran for 328 yards back in 1986 for Carolina. Again, it's a very close margin, and I think it's exactly what is shown by the fans at home. They went with Sam against Wake Forest, 47.1% of the vote to Michael Carter versus Miami, 45.1. It was 1 vote that separated the 2 of them. De'Ami Brown got 4 votes, and rightfully so. That was a tremendous performance. Yeah. He just both years tore up Virginia, but couldn't come away with a win in either one of them. Who knows? That might have been ranked a little bit higher had they been able to win that game. We're not even going to really discuss this because we talked about this right off the top. Do you consider 2020 a successful year for the Tar Heels? 100% of the 53 responses that we received say yes. Yeah. So no doubt in a lot of people's minds there. This one, very, very interesting. Which Tar Heel early enrollee do you think can have the biggest impact next year? You can weigh in on this one if you want to. I know you're not as in tune with college football recruiting, but you look. We'll throw up the fan graphic first. Go through some of them. You got Keyshawn Silver. He receives 12 votes, so 23.1%. Ra Dilworth was second with 11 votes with 21.2% of the vote, tied with Caleb Hood. This one kind of shocked me a little bit. But a lot of people with him coming in at running back, there's a lot of opportunity there. Also a legacy. A lot of Tar Heel fans very excited about his ability from what they've heard from some of the people that were at these camps when he was making the transition to running back. He gets 11 votes as well, 21.2% of the vote. Then a couple other ones, DeAndre Boykins with 3 votes. You got Dontavius Nash, 3 votes as well. J.J. Jones, 3 votes. Diego Pounds. Pretty much everybody that I listed, I listed all 12. Everybody but Jabari Ritzie somehow got a vote. How did Jabari Ritzie not get a vote is blowing my mind. Guys just don't have enough respect for a guy that could come in. He's drawn comparisons. They have it on 24/7 Sports. One that really excites me. They compare him to Jeffrey Simmons, who, of course, plays for the Tennessee Titans, played at Mississippi State. That should really excite a lot of other people, but apparently not. They go with Keyshawn Silver. Do you have a guy that you're really looking forward to seeing? Also, Drake May is in there. That's another guy.
Yeah, I'll go with Silver because I'll side with the fans on this one because I wasn't even listening to while you were talking.
There you go. 5-star player, so it's definitely a legitimate one. I think Dontavius Nash is very interesting because he's a safety that a lot of people feel like can come in and is college ready.
Did a wide receiver enroll early?
Yeah, you got 3 of them. You got Gavin Blackwell. Yeah. You've got which Gavin I think makes the most sense. If you're going to look at this group and say, okay, we're going to go with a guy here. Gavin played with Sam in high school. He's a slot receiver as well. So you feel like at this point it's Josh Downs and that's pretty much it. Yeah. With Togro's leaving, there's an opportunity to be had here. So I think that's probably the guy you're looking at. J.J. Jones can take the tops off the defense. I think he's going to be a guy that's going to sort of remind you of De'Ami Brown as he gets later on in his career. Kobe Paysauer also coming in. Actually, all 3 wide receivers are coming in early, so they're all going to have a chance to make an impact.
I would say you got to keep an eye on them because Carolina is going to need them to make an impact in the receiving core with you losing De'Ami Brown, with you losing Daz Newsome.
Yeah, Caleb Hood, I think a lot of people are jumping on this bandwagon, and I think that they've got a legitimate case here with all that Carolina's losing. I mean, look, we saw British Brooks look decent in the bowl game. Got to see a little bit of Josh Henderson. Didn't see much of Elijah Green, but unless there's just something not being released, he's going to be a factor in the race this offseason. And remember, DJ Jones also coming back from injury. But it still feels like there's a pretty open door here. So if Caleb Hood can come in and impress, you never really know what he would be able to do. The only thing that stinks is he's coming over. He played quarterback his entire high school career. So he's not a guy that's overly familiar with the position. I don't think it's going to be that much of a change for him, but it's still going to take a little bit of time early on for him to be able to get used to it. That's why Robert Gillespie is there. He's going to coach him up. I think it hurts that they don't have Kamaro Edmonds coming in early. But yeah, I think, when you look at Dontavius Nash is probably the guy that I would go with, just flying under the radar. Because I mean, look, the safety position, from what I saw at the end of the season, wasn't in great shape. Maybe that's just me. Some people I know really like Trey Morrison. I love Trey Morrison. I thought he was fantastic in the nickel. He had a tremendous freshman season. I don't think safety is the long-term outlook for him. I just don't think he's a good enough tackler in the box. He's not a guy that can help you that much in run defense. And that was one of the big things that we saw from Carolina as the season went along. You saw the struggles of both him and Don Chapman on the back end being able to help you in the run game. That's something that Carolina is going to have to take a look at. They may even go and look in the transfer portal and see if there's a guy that can maybe help them out immediately now because they feel like their defense is at that spot. But if not, Dontavius Nash is the guy that can slide in there and take that. My ultimate pick, though, I'll go with Ra Dilworth. I think, you look at his skill set. He's a sideline-to-sideline linebacker. He's a guy that can cover in space. He can get after the quarterback. He's extremely quick. He's drawn those comparisons to Isaiah Simmons, but he fits Jay Bateman's defense about as good as anybody in this class. I think he's going to be a perfect fit there. So I'll go with Ra. As we mentioned, you guys barely go with Keyshawn Silver over Ra Dilworth and Caleb Hood. That was a really interesting one to see the different array of responses there. And then we'll close it out with what was your way too early prediction for the Tar Heels in 2021? A lot of people looking ahead to the Tar Heels schedule already. A pretty navigatable one for the Tar Heels. The toughest test that they're going to have is probably going on the road to Notre Dame. Other ones that may stick out a little bit on the road at Virginia Tech. You have, that's just a place you've really struggled. You got Miami at home. That's probably the team that you see as the biggest threat to you in the ACC Coastal with the fact that they're returning De'Ara King. Some pretty decent defensive talent as well, although they are going to have some guys that they're going to have to replace, especially their pass rushers. So when you look at that, I mean, look, we'll go with the fans at home here first. They have 49.1% of the vote going towards a 10-2 record, 11-1 or better. 34% of the vote. A lot of Tar Heel fans very confident that this team can even take a step forward from this year. 9-3, that got 15% of the vote, and one lone person deciding to go 8-4. Not quite as optimistic as some of the rest of the fan base. What are you looking at in that range for Carolina? I know you haven't seen the full schedule, but it's nowhere near as daunting as this season was even being set up to be before COVID set in.
I think you're looking 9-3. I'll lean 10-2 because I think Carolina will have the best quarterback in the ACC next year, and Sam Howell, and he will win you a couple games.
There's no question. He is better than DJ Uiagalelei right now because he has played more than Uiagalelei has. Like the fact that Uiagalelei in the poll that was ran by Eric McLean was deemed the best quarterback in the ACC returning is mind-blowing to me.
Like, that's just Clemson bias. I think you're going to see that happen with Carolina, is that you'll win some games and you'll look at the way that he plays as opposed to the opposing quarterback. Even though he's not going to have the 2,000-yard backs in his backfield and the 2,000 receivers and Daz Newsome, he's still going to elevate guys around him, which is why it's going to be such an intriguing prospect when he gets in the NFL level, because he has that kind of ability to do that. I think he'll win you a game or two you probably shouldn't win, and I think Carolina will scrap their way to 10-2.
All right, a couple other questions that we didn't ask the fans, though, before we get out of here. Carolina returning 5 guys for this season that are coming back for most of them their 6th year of eligibility, but an extra year of eligibility that wouldn't have been there had they not had the COVID rules in place. You got Bo Corrales, Tamon Fox. You have Grayson Atkins coming back, the kicker. You have Garrett Walston and Tyrone Hopper. Which one of those 5 do you think will have the biggest impact next year for Carolina? Because I think there's a good case for pretty much every one of them.
Yeah, I think if Carolina goes 10-2, I think you look at Tamon Fox, because I think he's got to be a more part of what this defense is doing, because he has the talent. He's got to be more consistent. I'll go Bo Corrales because I think he'll be a trusted receiver from Sam Howell, especially when they get inside the red zone and the field trick. He'll be a guy that he'll throw the football to go get it. And I expect him to have a big season as he comes back.
See, I think Tamon Fox is definitely going to be a guy that Carolina is going to count on as a pass rusher. I feel like that you're going to see some guys that have taken, that have another year, have an offseason to grow, that'll be able to, help him out. There'll be a little bit more rotation, so Tamon won't have to be on the field as much, which may serve him a little bit better. Bo Corrales, definitely a guy that's going to be a big target for Carolina. He's one of the only guys that's really proven. This was a guy that, of course, had over 600 yards receiving 2 years ago, or last year, before going down with an injury this year after a career game against Florida State. You think he would have been a guy that, similar to Daz Newsome, probably would have gotten a season on track, would have probably finished with over 500 yards receiving yet again, had another good year. So definitely a guy that you would expect with both Brown and Newsome gone will have to step up and play a big role as well. But, the other guy that I think when you look at Carolina taking another step forward, they're going to be in some close games. That's just part of it. They're still a team that's growing. This is not a team that's going to be a world beater similar to, Alabama or Clemson. I think Grayson Atkins is a guy that's going to have to take another step forward for Carolina and could be the biggest impact player for this team next year. If he can sort of find his range, be a little more consistent like we saw towards the end of the year, you probably feel confident that Carolina has a kicker that can be a weapon and help you, to avoid having to go for, some of these 4th downs pretty much outside of the 30-yard line. I think that he's going to be a big guy there, but also don't discount Garrett Walston either. And then the last thing that we'll talk about is when you look at the positions that Carolina does have to replace guys at, primarily running back and wide receiver, which one of those 2 do you feel like will be more difficult to replace? I think the easy answer is running back, but you do have to remember that you're losing your top 2 receivers each of the last 2 years, and a guy in Daz Newsome that, although you may not realize it, ranks as one of the best wide receivers in program history, statistically.
Yeah, I think you're going to have a hard time replacing Yami Brown, replacing Daz Newsome, but the system allows you to be more comfortable replacing that because of the way that Phil Longo puts together his route trees. And you've got a lot of talent in the receiver room. Not saying there's not a lot of talent in the running back room, but you're losing, a historic duo that you've got to find a way to replace. And as I said all year long, when Carolina's at their best, they're a run-first football team. If they're going to win 10 games, if they're going to take the next step, you've got to find consistent play from the running back group. So I think that's going to be the position we'll have all of our eyes on when we get to spring ball and when we get to fall camp. What are those guys doing from the running back position?
I agree. The offense wasn't nearly as efficient as you would have liked when Carolina wasn't effective running the ball, a la Notre Dame, Texas A&M, and the Orange Bowl. Those are the types of games, if you look back, even going back to 2019 on the road at Virginia Tech, when Carolina can't run the ball consistently, they struggle because they're predictable. It is what it is. I mean, Sam Howell still has had some really great performances, but Carolina has to be able to run the football to be successful. The other reason, and the big reason why I think running back is the position that you go with, is experience. You look at the experience of the guys that are at wide receiver. You've got Joffrey Brown, who had to play a little bit this year once Bo Corrales went down with an injury, started a couple of games even. Same thing with Emory Simmons, although he didn't look great in the Orange Bowl game, only had one target in that game. Still a guy that you feel like can be counted on, has proven that he can get the job done. A couple of really nice catches this season for him. And there's still some other guys back there. And then in the slot, don't really have to worry too much about that either. You feel pretty confident that Josh Downs is going to be able to slide right in there. There was so much hype around him last offseason, and he looked great in the Orange Bowl game, was probably Carolina's best receiver in that entire game. Daz Newsome had a pretty successful game as well, but Josh Downs, 2 touchdown catches in that game, really did a great job throughout the night. So I think that running back is probably the position you're looking at. It also is telling that when you see a lot of these message boards for Carolina that a lot of people are discussing, even just on social media, what's the one position group that they bring up? If they're going to look in the transfer portal, they should probably look at running back. So I think that's definitely the more concerning of the two. But I think ultimately, I'm not overly concerned about either position. I don't know about you. I definitely think there's some unease about running back, but you feel like the fact that our assistant coach of the year is still going to be there. And we've seen, DJ Jones was a 4-star running back for a reason. Elijah Green, 3-star running back, guy that has a lot of speed. We liked what we saw from both of those in limited moments as well. So I still feel like there's a reason to be confident that the offense will be fine in 2021. So that wraps it up for the 2020 season here on the Heel Tough Blog podcast. It has been a fun one for sure. One, again, that we did not know if we were going to be able to get completely through. At a time, we didn't even know if we were going to even be able to see it get underway. But Carolina, with one of their best seasons in recent memory, even though they finished 8-4, that record doesn't tell just how good of a season it was for the Tar Heels. Of course, we're still going to be here in the offseason. There's a ton of other stuff that we're going to be doing. You won't see Josh as much now that we are in the offseason mode. You won't even see us as much. Be a lot of interviews that'll be coming up. We've got some really great guests that are going to be coming on to help us wrap up the 2020 season. Of course, last edition of the podcast, you guys can go back and check that out with Lee Pace. We've got Bill Bender, our friend from the Sporting News, that's going to come on and talk with us as well. Those are the ones that are scheduled as of right now. We're going to keep trying to get some of our other favorites on as well as some new people to jump on, talk about the Tar Heels and their potential going forward as well. And then, of course, we'll have you covered once this team goes into spring ball, which won't be too far around the corner. Believe it or not, it'll be here pretty quick. We'll have the early enrollees coming in here pretty soon. So Carolina, it's going to be a pretty fast-moving offseason, and there'll probably be a lot of stuff, especially with how active the transfer portal has been. Carolina will no doubt probably at least take a look at the transfer portal, as well as some other stuff still on the recruiting trail. The 2021 trail, not done just yet. Dre Bly looks like he is still trying to add another cornerback to this class. As of right now, Carolina has only offered one guy since the end of the early signing period, but that's still something to keep an eye on going forward, see if Carolina can potentially add another member of that class. And, of course, the 2022 class is underway. Some guys that are teasing potentially making some decisions here soon, including big 5-star offensive tackle Zach Rice. If any of those guys pop, we'll be covered over on HeelToughBlog.com. Also, make sure that you rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast. If you're a listener, rating and reviewing will help us move up some of those message boards. And the subscribing is for you so that every edition can go right into your podcasting library. And if you're with us on the Facebook page, that's where you can get all the articles and every edition of the podcast on there as well. Make sure you like and follow the Facebook page So whenever we premiere a new edition of the podcast, it'll tell you that we're about to premiere a video. You can lock yourself in, pull up the video, and watch for however long that episode is on. But again, we want to say thank you, express our appreciation for you guys sticking through with us this season. Of course, the last couple of weeks we haven't been on video. That's because I went through COVID-19, was tested positive for that. So we wanted to make sure everything was safe. That's why we were rolling with everything over the phone. And from now until the near future here, whenever I do an edition of the podcast with Josh, we will be on camera as long as nothing else gets in the way. So again, we want to really express our gratitude to you guys for sticking with us during this season. Even with the transition to video, you guys have made that extremely successful as well. So that wraps it up for this edition of the podcast. I want to thank Josh for hosting with me. I want to thank you guys for watching and listening. And as always, go Tar Heels!